Wellness Wednesday. I'm thrilled to have Leah Mack here tonight. And I didn't get your bio, so I'm going to have to let you introduce yourself. I know that you're a regenerative eco farmer, and I can share how I know you. I'll do that. So Leah and I met through a mutual friend, Sally Boris, who owned White Rose Farm in Tawnytown, which was a biodynamic farm. And she passed away this past fall. And Leah and I actually met at her celebration of life. I have heard of Leah Mack for a while, and we just had never connected until this service. And since then, I learned what she does, and I was just blown away and so excited to know her and learn more about what she does. And plus, I had just watched the Netflix show Kiss the Ground, which if you have never watched it, I highly recommend it. All about regenerative farming and regenerative ranching, and how it's amazing for human health and health of the soil and health of the planet. So Leah has a regenerative farm in Maryland, and I'm gonna let her take it away, because I want to know more about Leah. I want you to know more about Leah, and I want you to know how she came to be in this amazing farm called Grazy Days. Over to you, Leah.
All right. Well, I grew up on a vegan commune farm, and so we had horses and trees and gardens, but we didn't have meat animals. And I always knew that I wanted to farm, but I didn't envision it involving animals for food originally. And then a bunch of health issues eventually pushed me towards needing to eat animal foods, and I figured if I was going to eat them, I wanted to raise them myself. I wanted to know how they lived and make sure they'd had a good life and care for them myself. So in between, I went to college and served in the Peace Corps and worked in DC and got married and had a couple kids, and I was lucky enough to be able to draft my family to come out here and live in Frederick County and live in Tennessee. And my daughter actually helped me run the farm. She's 12, and she is intending to take the farm over someday. And so my website says Mother and Daughter Eco Farm. So that's the way that we are acknowledging her commitment to it. And my husband and my son don't really want anything to do with it, but they like to eat the products, and they'll come out and dig post holes for me occasionally.
Right. Wow. So after we had met and I really wanted to see this farm, I brought my 9-year-old son and a neighbor and her 2 kids. And I have to say that it turned me into a kid. Like, I had at least as much fun as the kids did. So the kids rode a pony, and we went out to the field and saw the cows, and we learned about the sheep and the red marking they have on their behind and what that means. We'll have to share that. And your friend and neighbor has pigs in the same space. We saw some free range chickens. So it was just a wonderful day. And it was smack in the middle of COVID, when we were just so in need of being in contact with nature and something good. And you filled the bill. You know, you did that for us on that day. So we were grateful for that experience. So can you explain to anyone who is unfamiliar what regenerative farming is, and what's so good about it? Why am I so excited that I know a regenerative farmer?
Well, I mean, the idea is that if we destroy the planet while producing our food, and that's not a good strategy in the long term, right? We want to produce food in a way that allows us to keep on producing food and to keep on having nature and soil and plants and air and all the things that make this planet beautiful and make it livable for us. So I guess the idea is to build soil, to build biodiversity, to take us in the direction of greater health for people and animals and plants and soil, and rather than the other way around, where we're deteriorating everything as we use it.
So this was kind of new to me. I mean, the farm that we connected through with the biodynamic farm, that was, I guess it was regenerative, though I hadn't used that language. It was organic, though we didn't have the certification. And so White Rose Farm has pulled away from biodynamics, but going forward, we're going to maintain it being a non-certified organic farm. We won't use pesticides and herbicides that are harmful. But you mentioned on your website that whole certification, just to get the organic stamp, is time consuming and expensive, mostly. But I didn't know really about regenerative farming until I watched that film, Kiss the Ground. And can you share how you manage your herd so that they nourish the soil, and explain how that's helpful for the soil and for the environment?
Well, that's the big thing, really, is that soil is built over time. It has historically been built over time, largely by the interactions of animals and plants, and the large grazing herds of bison and kudu and whatever, coming through and stomping in the plants and manuring it, and then leaving and allowing it to rest and regenerate. And that's where all that organic matter is converted by the grasslands into a more stable form of carbon in the soil. And so if you just turn your cows loose to just roam around and eat what they want, they do the opposite. They take out the most desirable plants, they continuously overgraze the soil, they deteriorate the quality of the soil and the plants. And so by having these portable electric fences, or herd people, depending on where you live and how you do it, but by controlling the grazing so that they can eat only a certain area and they only impact that area, and then you move them to another area as often as possible. Usually it's once a day. Some people manage more. I manage once a day, to a new area. So the old area then gets to completely rest and recover before it's grazed again, and they're not just meandering about helping themselves to everything and degrading the soil. And so as they eat the plants down, the plants in the soil, they have to shed their roots to match, so that their root portion matches their leaf portion. And so the cows eat the leaves, the plants shed roots, and that really does a lot to over time improve the organic matter in the soil. And then the plants that the cows didn't eat are trampled into the soil by their hooves, and of course it leaves saliva and manure and everything, and that fertilizes it, and that really kickstarts the regrowth. And then you don't come back to that area for at least a month until it's really kicking again. And it's a real different process than just turning them loose to roam around. And you'll see these pastures where grazing animals are just turned loose and they're just grazed to the soil. There's nothing protecting the soil. The roots aren't, growing and shedding in the same way. There's mostly inedible weeds growing. And so that's the main aspect. A lot of people think that you're not really doing regenerative farming if you aren't managing large grazing animals with frequent moves like this. That's why I do it, in order to sort of maximize that. And they say, the people who study this, some of the people who study this, that I follow, that you can sequester more carbon from the atmosphere by grazing like this than if you planted all this land to trees. Now, I haven't done any scientific research on this myself. I just read the people who do it. But and there's some debate. It's not. There's no consensus. But what we want is, we want the carbon in the soil and not in the air. Right? In the air, it causes climate change. In the soil, it causes more fertile soil. So it does us good in one place and harm in another. And so the idea is to suck it out of the air and put it in the soil as fast as possible. And this is the best way that I know of to do that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So it's more work for you as the farmer though, because you're out
Oh yeah,
on the fence on a daily basis, and but your daughter helps.
people don't do it, I think. Yeah.
So how many cows do you have, and how much space do they need for that, 24-hour period before you move the fence again?
So it depends on the climate. When the grass is growing quickly, you give them bigger areas and you move them through faster. And when the grass is growing more slowly, you slow them down and you extend the rest period so it can recover more. So right now, I don't know how to describe it. It's probably more than an acre we're giving them every day. It might be 2 acres. I'm going to guess it's 2 acres. You can put a lot of houses on it. And so we're sort of flying through, and then we'll cut that down to about half as the rate of growth slows down a little bit, which will almost double the rest period. The important time is the rest period, that the plants have enough time to come back to a mature state of growth before they're regrazed.
Right. Yeah. Now the grass is pretty green, so I imagine it's growing pretty quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. And how many are they called cows? Am I using the right words? Beef, cat.
Yeah.
How many do you have at this moment? Look.
I've got 23 altogether. That's a couple of babies that were born this spring so far, a bunch that were born last year, 14 mamas and a bull.
Okay. How do you manage the bull?
We buy a breed that is docile.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the idea. So hopefully he doesn't give us any trouble, and he just hangs out with the cows.
Oh, perfect. Good. So this way of farming, we talked about it being good for the soil. It sequesters carbon, so good for the environment. Dr. Mark Hyman, who's one of the functional medicine doctors that I follow, he had several regenerative farmers on his podcast, and they have talked about, we could reverse climate change if we had farmers farming like this all around the world. So talk about how it's so dramatically different from the way most animals are raised on feedlots, and how it changes the way it changes the health of the animal, and thus the nutrition that people get when they're eating the animal.
Yeah. So the vast majority of cattle are raised on pasture when they're young, but the kind I talked about where they're just left there all the time. So they're not improving that soil at all. And then they're put in a feedlot where they are fed at best grain, and at worst, factory candy bar scrapings and chip crumbles from junk food factories, apparently. Yeah, and that's really bad for them. They're in deep manure. They don't get to graze. They don't have natural behaviors accessible to them, and they're not designed to eat that kind of level of that kind of feed, and so they get what's called acidosis, which makes them sick. It can cause them to excrete dangerous E. coli that can sicken humans, which grass-fed cattle don't do. People are basically eating dying cattle. It's repulsive and inhumane. And it's done purely out of financial greed. I mean, the system is apparently cheaper, especially if you're feeding them, trash, basically. And because the government subsidizes the production of corn and soybeans, it's cheaper to feed that to them than it is for me to raise them on grass out here. So it's and then the quality of the meat. Not only are they ill, but when you eat their meat, their fat is all corn fat, so it's all omega-6s and stuff which we already get too much of. Whereas when you have the grass-fed cattle, their fat is much higher in omega-3s because they're only eating the grass, and they have this thing called CLA, which is really good anti-cancer compound. But if you feed them basically any grain, it defeats that. So a lot of local producers will raise cattle and advertise them as grass-fed. What they really mean is, yeah, they're on pasture eating grass, but I also feed them some grain, which is definitely better than a feedlot, but doesn't have some of these most optimum benefits of the omega-3s and the CLA and stuff. But they do that because it's actually really hard to raise good beef just on grass. You can't just take any cattle and do that, because if the cattle were bred for the genetics for thriving in a feedlot, they don't do well on just grass. So you have to obtain cattle with the right genetics to thrive on grass. And you can't have as many of them on your land because they need more food from the grass. And you really need to move them every day like this to let the grass get to a state of nutrition that supports them. Because if you just turn them loose, they're always eating it at the beginning stages of its growth cycle, and it doesn't have the same nutrient profile. And you can shortcut that by feeding grain. But if you're not feeding grain, you have to, it's a much trickier job to do if you're not feeding grain.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't heard all the details that you just mentioned. So do you plant anything like, I don't know, clover or something special, or you just whatever grass happens to come up?
I seeded this pasture when I bought this farm. It had been in corn before, and I actually went way out of my way to put in 5 kinds of grass and 3 kinds of clover and plantains and another broadleaf medicinal one that's escaping me at this moment. But some basically medicinal, food herbs that, in order to give them the broadest, most nutritious base. But I don't plant every year or something. These are all perennials. And so some people do plant, certain things that they just graze in the winter or whatever. And that might be convenient, but I don't have the equipment for that. And so that's not something I've done.
Okay. Yeah, I'm learning so much. Very exciting.
Chicory. It was plantain and chicory.
Oh, okay. Oh, it came to you.
Yes.
So what does a typical day look like for you? Are you rising at the crack of dawn and outside all day long?
We get up on the earlier side. Right now we're feeding some bottle lambs in the morning. So thankfully they're past the middle of the night feeding stage. And then we're out there, with the chickens and the sheep and, food and water and moving cows and feeding horses and all those things. Some days we work outside all day. Some days I homeschool my children. So usually we're doing other things too, it's between errands and homeschooling and, all the regular stuff, making dinner. It's, it's part-time basically. But it depends on the day. So it doesn't take all day to do the basic chores, but if I have an animal that's sick, or I've got to take some to be harvested, or I've got to unload hay, or any one of a million other things, then those are long days. Yeah. Right.
So we talked a little bit about the cows. I don't know anything about the sheep or the chickens or the pigs. Is it the same way as the cows? You don't have to cordon them off in zones like the cows, do you?
Yeah, no, the chickens don't. The chickens just go wherever they want. The sheep, we do move around. They're not as easy to contain as the cattle, and it's not as important because they don't have as much of an impact on the land. They're so much lighter and smaller. But we do moving them around, and so sheep are prone to parasites. They're easily harmed by them, which cattle aren't. And cattle and sheep and horses don't share any parasites. They don't catch them from each other. And so I try to graze an area with the sheep, let it grow, and then graze the horses or the cows there, and then let it grow before the sheep come back. So that, because the parasites from the sheep manure will climb to the top of the grass, and then if they're eaten by a horse or a cow, they just die. And so most people are injecting their sheep full of these toxic chemical wormers all the time. And I've been able to avoid doing that. by offering them herbs and by using these other species, synchronistically to impact, they eat slightly different things, they impact the soil differently, and then they control the parasites for each other. So it's actually really helpful to have multiple species using the same land surface.
Yeah, that's interesting. And since I mentioned the mark on the back of the sheep, we probably should say what that is. Because we were all fascinated. What is that mark on the back of the sheep?
So in the fall, when we turn the ram loose with the ewes to breed them, we want to know when their babies will be due. And so we put this strap this harness onto the ram that has this waxy crayon on his chest. And when he breeds a ewe, it leaves a mark on her rump. And we check every day. When there's a new mark on a ewe, we write it down, the date, and then we can calculate her due date so we can watch for the babies. And then we know when everybody's been bred. And then we keep it for a second month if none of them come back into season, then we know they're all pregnant.
It's brilliant. Whoever came up with that.
They actually, in a bigger flock, they'll turn 3 or 4 rams loose with the flock and have different colors on each one. And then they know also who bred her.
Right. Smart. So you sell the meat of each of these animals, is that right?
We sell grass-fed beef and lamb and pastured eggs.
And pastured eggs.
Soy-free, corn-free pastured eggs, yeah.
Yeah. So when you mentioned that some farmers will claim grass-fed, but then it's really not grass finished, which I've heard that term, it's grass-fed, grass-finished. I know you mentioned on your website 100% grass-fed. That's the same thing, right? Grass-fed, grass-finished, 100%. So how do people go about ordering or getting the meat from you?
Well, I have a website that's grazydays.com. And so there's a sign up for an email list on there. And when I have product available, I'll put out an email telling people that I have either half steers or whole lambs to order. And then people customize the cuts they want from those when I take them into the harvester. And sometimes I sell from the farm directly. So the eggs I sell from the farm directly, people will come here sometimes and buy them, or I'll go into town and drop them off to people sometimes if I'm in Frederick and people live there. And I've got ground beef in stock. So somebody will contact me and say, hey, can I pick up, 10 or 25 pounds of ground beef? And I'll say, sure. And, they'll tell me when they want to come by and I'll meet them and sell it to them. So it's not the kind of thing where you can get a pound of ground beef when you're at the grocery store with the cucumbers, but most of my customers have an extra freezer and they just stock up a little bit and then they don't have to do it all the time.
Right. So I know when we first were meeting and getting to know each other, we both shared that you mentioned at the beginning that you were vegan. I went through a long phase of being vegetarian and also had health problems. I was not a good vegetarian, and it wasn't good for my body. But I'm a lover of animals, and I don't want to support animals in feedlots, and I want to support the environment, and just trying to marry all of these things together in my mind. Like, you came up with something that just felt right to me. I don't have any traditional cultures in my blood, and I've never even really been exposed to any traditional cultures, but you shared something that really struck me and felt right, about how you honor the animals kind of before they're sent away. Can you just share a little bit about that? Are you comfortable?
Yeah, that's fine. No, it's it's kind of a struggle for me too, because I love them and I care for them, and then to take them off to be killed, it's hard, actually. And so I was doing a lot of meditating and praying about it for a while, and I was just asking, whoever, is this the right thing to do? Am I doing the wrong thing? And I got this strong and surprising answer that said, you're doing the right thing. These beings chose this. They do their work, and they need you to do certain things for them so they can do their work. And they made this deal. They need you to feed them and protect them from predators, and you need to send them love when you take care of them, and you need to give them shelter, and you need to do a ceremony when you're going to harvest them. And in exchange for all that, they become your food. And that's the deal they made. Which surprised me because I didn't expect to get sort of that clear of an answer. Often we don't when we ask these questions. You get this vague, thing. But I got this very clear, surprising answer, and so I've been working on that. I'm improving my shelter for the cows so they can have the shelter they need as instructed, and I practice loving them every day, and I do a little ceremony before I harvest them. It's basically just prayers, non sort of generic. Generic's not the right word, but not specific to any particular belief system. And I thank them for their contribution to our nutrition and their sacrifice, and
Yeah. Another farmer that I met through Sally had shared a similar kind of experience, and how it feels to take the life of an animal. So she will harvest her own chickens, and how it's hard, but it's also like amazingly connecting and spiritual in like a whole kind of new way that she didn't necessarily expect to have that experience. I've never been a hunter. My brother-in-law's a hunter, and I think he sees it the same way. It's almost a spiritual experience hiding out in the woods and waiting for a deer to pass by.
It's the cycle of life. Most animals eat other animals, and I think we as our society have gotten so disconnected from nature and reality that people love their dogs and they don't want to eat their dogs, so they extrapolate that to everything else, and that's natural and understandable, but it's also wasn't good for my health, and it's not good for a lot of people's health, and it's not really the way the world works. Most creatures eat other creatures, and it is part of this beautiful cycle that we have, and people lose track of that.
Right. You share a lot of really interesting things on your website, and I recommend anyone who's listening to go check it out. Plus a couple of just nice ways how to get healthy food into your life. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm grateful that I don't live that far from you. I don't eat a lot of red meat. I treat it more as like an occasional side dish, not a daily experience, but I'm looking forward to giving your grass finished steak a try. Yeah.
Ironically, I don't eat very much of it either.
Yeah.
My husband and my son live on the stuff, but I don't eat a lot of it. I don't.
I just need, on occasion. And it was when I first realized I really need meat, is I was about halfway through my first pregnancy, and I was like, I need a steak this second. I hadn't had much meat at all for like 10 years. And my body was like, you better eat some meat or something bad is going to happen. Then it was, 6 years after that, I had become vegetarian again after the pregnancy, that I developed multiple sclerosis. And when I went to a nutritionist, we really talked it out, and it was like, your body needs omega-3s, it needs B12, it needs iron, you're not getting what you need. And so it was a shift for me. And so I have a daughter who's vegetarian, and it's hard to help her find the balance, but it's her decision right now. So, but
Yeah.
I appreciate you creating meat that I feel okay about eating. Yeah. And I'm not the only one out there that is grateful for you. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And Grazy Days Farm, Leah Mack. Thank you so much, Leah, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Take good care. Talk soon.